Hi, thank you everyone for coming tonight. Sorry about this slight technical hitch. I have a quick computer switch. It wouldn't be a modern presentation without something going slightly wrong. Hopefully things are in order now. We've got a series of lectures. They're hopefully all fairly mercifully short. I think mine should be. And we'll go through what we've been doing at the castle, new site, well, relatively new site, Bradford Kaims, and we'll also have some presentations on some of the new technology we're coming to terms with at the moment, incorporating in the way we work, and also Jeff is going to talk about some of the finds from the castle. So without too much more, I will flip on to the next slide. This is Bamburgh Castle. We are working in the west ward. That's the lower part. It's all within the defensive perimeter, but it's still part of the fortress site itself, but it's the lower part. It's not the focus of the fortress. But it does mean that there's some interesting stuff going on there in terms of archaeology. I'll give you a very quick background to the excavation, because some of you may be coming to this for the first time. The castle was occupied, well, the fortress built on the rock has been known to be occupied for at least 2,000 years. In fact, if we look at the excavations that Dr. Hope Taylor did in the 1960s and 70s, and again, the work we've been doing over more than a decade now, we can probably push that date back into the prehistoric period, certainly perhaps 3,000, 4,000 years. If the flint fragments at the base of one of the trenches we re-evaluated is correctly identified as Neolithic, we're looking at many thousands of years of occupation on this fortress rock by the sea. So we're looking at a very long used focal place, and we have an increasingly long research project investigating it. This is basically a summation of all the archaeology that's been done in the West Ward. These areas here are Dr. Hope Taylor's excavations from the 1960s and early 70s. Our two trenches, Trench 1, right up at this top end of the fortress here, that was sited to look at the defensive arrangements of the castle. And then we have another one here. This was originally set to investigate where Hope Taylor had been excavating, but because he died without the site being published, we effectively started to incorporate it into our own work. So the idea being, in a few years' time, we'll publish both the Hope Taylor excavations alongside our own. So if we start briefly in Trench 1, at the top there. This is the outline of the trench as it was a couple of years ago. The original trench was located up in the very far corner, and we were looking at the defensive arrangements of the fortress. There were problems, as it turned out, with this, because the modern wall that outlines the west ward was dug in, I think, probably the beginning of the 20th century, and they dug a very big foundation trench for it. So we've lost a lot of the archaeological material right on the edge of the rock. Nevertheless, we have picked up over previous seasons evidence of what we think to be a timber phase of defence, probably early to middle Anglo-Saxon. There may be prehistoric evidence of defence as well. We're getting down to the level of subsoil, and we've got lots and lots of post holes, as you can see. It looks almost like a moonscape in places. So the likelihood is that as we start to pick this apart in date, we will find multiple phases of timber fortress underneath the stone medieval fortress and the stately home that you see today. But the trench was fascinating to us for a particular reason, is that we got beneath the layers that are producing pottery. So we're into the first millennium AD, into the era of the Anglo-Saxon kings of Northumbria. And from that kind of dating region, we got the corner of two buildings. You can see one here, another there. One is a timber hall, and the second one is a hole in the ground, which we think is the gap left when you take a stone foundation or even a stone wall away. In fact, we've even got one or two fragments of worked masonry that may be little bits of this building left behind. So over the last few years, once we've identified this, we extended the trench all the way to Oswald's Gate, and we've now been infilling this area here because we wanted to see if we can identify floor surfaces and structures associated with these buildings. This is the trench just a few days ago. You can see this is the gate cleft. This is St Oswald's Gate. This has been, well, we have documentary evidence of this being the entrance to the fortress from AD 774 AD. So this is the Anglo-Saxon entrance into Bamburgh, and we have above it, just above the gate cleft, the outline of the timber building. You can see it's actually rock cut in places here. We've got a return of it running up there. That's the line of it going around here. And within it we've got this broader, flat-based rubber trench for a stone wall. So we've got the outline of two very big buildings. At the moment, our best interpretation is that because they dominate the gate cleft, they're kind of oriented onto it. We think that this is where the people who controlled access to the fortress would have lived and operated. Basically gate wards, if you like, the gatekeepers of the Anglo-Saxon king's palace fortress site. So that's our best interpretation. You can again, it probably emphasises it perhaps even better than the plan, because the ground has not risen over great depth over a period of perhaps 2,000 years and more. We have feature cutting, which makes it very complicated, as the people excavating the trench will tell you. It also means that any archaeological material that we find tends to be very truncated and cut up, because there are lots of features cut through it. Nevertheless, this season we have been taking down the area which is effectively within those buildings, and over the last couple of years we've identified a whole series of floor surfaces. Next slide. This is shooting the opposite way. This is from inside the fortress looking out towards where the previous photograph was taken, and again you can see all of this disturbance. We've got a medieval gully, a series of what may well just be animal burrows. But we also have post holes. There's a big pit over there, here. We've got quite a number of them. I'll show you another one in a moment. But we're also getting these darker soil colours, and they're darker because they contain quite a lot of charcoal and probably waste material, midden deposit as we call it, the waste product from kitchens and such like. Though there's not a great deal of dumping in this area, there is just sufficient to give us some degree of colour differentiation. But we've identified a series of pebble and charcoal floor surfaces, the latest of which here we have a very nice, quite beautifully laid series of small pebbles, very compacted. I'm guessing it was much more extensive, but you can see just the degree to which the archaeology is cut up by generations of features dug one within the other. But we are picking up these floor surfaces within the building. Next one. This is the latest one. It's just damp in there. You can see, really, it looks a bit like a yard surface. Lots and lots of pebbles set in, and what is it's a silt, but it's probably more clay than silt, so it's quite a good bedding material. And this is a very fine surface. So we're assuming that this is one of the floor surfaces within the building. We're about to be taking it off, possibly this week, certainly next year when we start again. If we don't have the time this year. But I'm guessing when this comes off, there's very little left. We're seeing this yellow material, which is the subsoil, appearing all over the trench now. So I think we're probably pretty much through these floor surfaces. So we've done the excavation part. The really difficult thing over the next few years is going to be to look at these floor surfaces within the buildings. We've got at least 2 buildings that we can identify and plan, and because we have all these post holes, it's clearly obvious we have more than those 2 buildings. So these floor surfaces may we may get more than one floor surface per building. The likelihood is we will. There may be patches and repairs in the floor surfaces. So we're going to have to try and date these floors and then try to associate them with the buildings that wrap around them. Though stratigraphically that's going to be quite difficult. But it will be interesting because the floor surfaces themselves will give us the material that's been trampled in. We may get evidence of seeds, of animal bones, stuff that people are eating, all of the evidence of everyday life. Floor surfaces are very good with that kind of thing. So one of our aims is going to be to try and match up the floors to the structures and tell a story of the people who are occupying these buildings. Next slide. I also mentioned that we haven't just got the plan outlines of buildings, which are construction trenches. We're also getting a series of post holes. And some of them are relatively modest in size. This is a sort of intermediate sized one. We can see here, this is a big post pit. That red and white pole there is 1 metre across, so that you're talking about this wide. So this is a big feature. It's got a gigantic boulder in it and a whole series of other packing stones. The likelihood is that this pit in the ground had a very big timber bulk stood up into it, and all of this rubble and stone, including this big lump of dolerite, has been packed in to hold the timber upright. So we're looking at a pretty substantial timber building, perhaps even a hall. This is the same post hole with all of the stone removed. So this is just the hole left in the ground into the boulder clay. This is an interesting area here because this slot here is the timber hall that we date broadly to the Middle Saxon period, perhaps 6th, 7th century AD. This is the broader slot where the stone building has been robbed away, the robber trench as we call it. And we've got a deeper hole here, which means there's a big post setting. We have this much deeper hole, which is a post setting. And as we've investigated this area, because we were hoping to see the robber cut for the stone building cut the timber building, we normally assume logically that the stone building will be later. Stone architecture coming into Northumbria at a later date, in the very end of the 7th century in terms of church architecture, but later. But as we've been looking for the relationship, a simple cutting relationship, we've probably got about 4 or 5 different features, all concentrated in an area of about 2 square yards. So we've been slowly picking this apart to try and solve this jigsaw puzzle. And if we get it right, it will give us a really good idea of the phasing sequence. In other words, the events one which follows the other. Next one. We're going to see a little bit more about this, so I'll push by this quite quickly. But we've been going excavating now for a little over a decade, and when we started, everything was paper. You write on your paper records, you draw on a waterproof paper called a permatrace, so to draw the plans. We measure it out using hand tapes and meter-long tapes and conventional grids. We put grid points into the ground, and we take photographs. We originally started taking slide and black and white print. Now we shoot digital as well. But we're slowly starting to move into a new age of recording. We're not going to stop using the old-fashioned methods because they're very good teaching techniques. But we're now starting to use multiple photographic frames to produce these sort of virtual photographic models. And if you get it right, you can actually measure directly from these models in the computer. But you're going to see a little bit more of this in a moment, so we'll skirt on by to the last part of the lecture. So this is the trench, this is the main area of excavation. We've got these large pit features, the floor surfaces. That's sort of coming together slowly as buildings and floors, but it's pretty complicated archaeology. I think we're starting to get a handle on it now. The post hole that we've just been looking at, this will give you some idea, is this great feature here. No, actually it's that one there, sorry. So this is where the linear comes in, where the robber cut comes in, and where we've got these big deep post settings. So you can see it's almost like a node where lots of different structures have been cutting each other at the same time. In the corner of the trench, actually can we flip back very briefly and I'll just orient ourselves because this is quite a close photograph. So this is where these main buildings have been, oops, one more. This is where the main buildings have been seen. This area here is where the floor surfaces survived. We had a rather annoying gully dug into the site in the later Middle Ages, perhaps the 13th to 14th centuries, which has kind of removed most of the floor surfaces and meant that the 2 parts of the trench that we've been excavating down didn't quite marry up. So the likelihood is we're earlier. So I'm going to look in this bottom corner here where we've lost most of the floor surfaces, but we do seem to have evidence of a building. It's a very broadly rectangular dark stain that we'd seen over about 2 seasons whenever we were cleaning back. It's full of rubble. We were calling it our sunken featured building because of its broad outline and shape. We kind of assumed that it was the negative, sort of a negative feature footprint of a foundation. This season we identified the edges of it as closely as I think we were ever going to. It turns out it's not a cut feature, as in a deliberately cut feature. I think it may be an eroded hollow within a relatively small timber building. So it looks, unlike the other buildings, which are quite substantial, really very high status looking structures, this is a little bit less high status. This is something much more less sophisticated. And right in the middle of it, we've got what we thought may have been, you can see there's a hole cut in this stone here. We thought that may be something which holds up a roof. Grubenhauser, which is a small sunken featured building which is characteristic of Anglo-Saxon sites. I have heard them described as a tent in timber form. And it may be that we're looking at something not much more substantial than that. Though it's not a classic Grubenhauser because we don't think it's a deliberate cut feature, we think it's more of an eroded feature with rubble presumably piled in to raise the floor surface up. Next one. But it is interesting because when we lifted that stone out, what we thought was the pivot stone, it turns out it may well have been used as a roof support, a socket, but it's actually a quernstone. This is for grinding corn. This is the hollow, it's got a hopper effectively in the middle of it. That's where the grain goes in. There was a little bit of a hollow out there, and we wondered if that was where the handle attached, but no. Look at the next slide. When we actually lifted it out, here's the side. There's actually a socket hole in the side, so the handle would have gone in there. You have a base stone. This is the top stone, it goes on top. You put your grain into the hopper and you turn the handle, and after a lot of work you get flour out. So this presumably was once in use in the fortress in the Anglo-Saxon period, goes out of use, and it has a convenient hole at the top, so it looks, I don't think we can absolutely be certain, but it looks like they've reused it to hold a roof support. We're going to move on very briefly to Trench 3. This is where we've been following in the footsteps of Brian Taylor. We've been working in the trench for a while now, and it's a very complicated archaeological puzzle, because not only do we have features which are cut into silt, backfilled with mostly silt, the surfaces, because we're in a big cleft in the rock that's been built up over hundreds of years, also have a tendency to slope. So it's very difficult to work out if you're all at the same phase, if all the surfaces exposed are the same period. This is the trench as it was a couple of years ago when we finally identified a clear building. This area footprint here, it's the rectangular outline of a crude foundation of a timber building, and there's a pathway made of gravel next to it. This turns out to be a metalworking building. It's surrounded by hammer scale and lots of metal finds. And we dated this relatively safely to the middle of the 9th century from a vast number of coins and quite a lot of small finds as well. So we finally found a surface that we properly understood, and then it just stopped. So the last 2 years we've been trying to interpret what's been going on in this northern part of the trench. And I think we're now starting, we haven't solved all the problems yet, but I think we now realise why this path suddenly stops and what's going on in that northern side. This is the outline of what we think to be a timber hall. Now, this was right at the beginning of this season. This line here, you can see there's lots of stone on that side, and it never really crossed more than about a third of the trench width. And we finally realised that there was basically a timber slot running through here. And then this season we realised that we've got the slot in section. These are World War I practice latrine pits, believe it or not. We use them as test pits because the archaeology has already been destroyed, so we can dig out the backfill and see what's going on beneath the levels we're at. And it's been very helpful because we've identified this building going through here in section, and coming out into this final test pit. We also had a slot up here near to the bedrock, so we joined it together with some tape. And the metalworking building is down here, the path runs up to here, there's a path in there, and so it looks by inference that this building is why the path suddenly stops, so that there was a timber building standing there in the 9th century. So we're tentatively dating this to the 9th century. The problem we're going on is in this corner here, because we're trying to work out whether the slot there is this building or whether we should be looking deeper to find the return of this building. And the answer to that is we don't know yet, but hopefully we'll know by next season. This is this northwest corner. It turned out that we're actually later in date in that corner than we were in the rest of the trench. So the last 2 years we've been playing catch up. We removed a stone foundation with an internal partition, and we identified a mortar floor surface beneath it. You can see a very straight-ish line running along there. That gives the impression that we've got a timber beam here. The mortar basically is the floor surface stops where the wall of the building, quite a small building, stood. This is the beam slot here that we excavated last year, and we were guessing maybe part of this 9th century structure, but we're now less certain. So we've now taken that this surface off and we're reducing it. And as you can see, there's lots of rubble packed in here. And it turns out that it runs across this area. So again, that may be a hard standing for a structure. So as we finish this week, we may go away with quite a few questions left to resolve in this corner of the trench. But we've either already identified the 9th century building, we're in the 9th century, or either at the end of this week or beginning of the next season, we'll identify the real line of that fourth wall of the missing building. And finally, this season, we've not just been trying to solve some archaeological problems, there are logistic problems as well. Because the excavation's been going on for so long, that the sections, the sides of the trench wear very badly. So we sandbagged this up, so we re-cleaned this section this year, which gives us a little look back in all of the archaeology we've been digging over the last decade. So we started with the turf and the topsoil. This is the Armstrong. We're looking at the 18th century. Then we have this huge midden deposit. This is a blow-up of this area here. The midden deposit comes down onto a point where we stop finding pottery. Then we have this burned, can you see this burned ash layer in there? It's only ever in that half or that third of the trench, and it actually extended across here and over that metalworking building. We think this is a giant timber hall that burned down in the 10th century. And beneath that we have a whole series of layers associated with the metalworking building. And we were just cleaning this section to cover it and make it safer with the semi-permeable membrane. And because you can never do anything at Bamburgh without finding something. This is a shell midden that we knew was there because we'd excavated part of it previously. But even just cleaning the ground and reducing it slightly to make a level platform, we've identified 2 post holes straight away for some structure that we haven't quite identified yet. But likelihood is, as we investigate, we may find some more in this area, so that it may make a pattern in the end. But that's the castle at the moment. I'm going to pass you over to my colleague who's going to talk to you about the, well, I call it photogrammetry. I'm not sure if that's the correct term. Okay, thanks, Jeff.
Hi there everyone, my name's Cole, I'm the Outreach Officer at Bamburgh Research Project, and I also fiddle with lots of other things, such as 3D rendering. So, to start the process, all you do is you take many photos, usually between 80 and 100 depending on what the size of the feature that you're trying to capture. So, for example, this, as you may recognize, from Trench 1, probably took about 80 photos to gather this. The software actually does most of the work, but you can add different layers and subtract other layers just so that you can get a clearer view of it. But it basically just amalgamates all the information from all the photos and fills in the spaces of things that it can't see. You can even look at the underside of things sometimes, which is a little disorienting. But you can zoom quite far in depending on how high of quality photos you took and at what quality you rendered all of the photos together. As Graeme said, it is quite useful. If you combine this with more precise EDM measurements that we take on various things in the trench, if you can combine it with those, it is fully measurable, which is very useful because as we do excavate and destroy, at the end of the season sometimes it can be a little confusing because we do take lots of photographs, we take lots of videos to record features, but this new way of seeing things is quite useful because you can actually step right back into the trench, which is great. Let's see. So that's the enormous post pit in Trench 1. This is our Bradford Kaims site. This one I just rendered today. It's not as high a quality as I would have liked because it does take up a lot of computer space to render these photographs. But I won't talk too much about this because I don't want to spoil the surprise. But this is a potential trough feature that we have. We're not entirely sure of its purpose at this point, but this is right next to Burnt Mound 6040 in Trench 6. If we zoom in, you can see this massive burning layer, and that's before we have so yeah, like I said, I haven't fiddled with this one too much, so it's not as clear as I would like it to be. And then the last one that I rendered earlier was of Trench 3. Oh my. Yeah, I did this one at quite low quality because I was running out of time. So you can see how things just kind of muddle together. Now Trench 3 is massive though, so it's understandable that things aren't looking as clear as they could be. But yeah, we were just experimenting with it this season to see how it can assist us with our recording process. And we hope that in the future we can implement it more in our recording process, and it'll be more standard in the future for our project. And that's all that I've got for photogrammetry.
And we don't get sued. So the first thing to come up is pottery. This first piece right here is a piece of Anglo-Saxon pottery, as well as number B, or letter B. If you notice, Graeme said that the cornerstone indicates from Trench 1 that it's Anglo-Saxon. That has actually come out of context 1367, as well as both of these pieces. So not only are they very interesting in their own right, especially with piece A with its size, we can actually get it tested for lipid analysis, so you can see what they were cooking with. But it can also indicate the date of the site. We're working in a trench, working out of a pit in Trench 3, in which there's a lot of Roman material as well. So we're getting Roman Sabian ware, and we're also getting black burnished ware that's coming out as well. So the next slide. This is just a close-up of B that I showed you, the Anglo-Saxon pottery, and you've noticed there's decoration pieces within. These are just known as chevrons, cutting through the pottery. Now, we're also getting out all different types from the metalworking area. Copper is going to be something that's mainly used for decorative pieces. So if you look at the pieces coming out, this is a copper stud. We originally thought that it was a pin, but judging because of its size, it could have been studded into a piece of clothing. B is a copper horse harness. C is a copper pin that has come out, so this would be a better quality. D could potentially be a stylus to write with, or it could have been an iron pin. Both C and D came out of the same context, so it would make sense that they both be pins. And E, it's hard to see, but it's a piece of worked flint. If you notice the way that it goes up vertically, it's actually a sharp of a flint blade that came out.
Can I just ask, is that copper or is it a copper alloy?
Which one? These three are all going to be copper alloy, and this is an iron. And this is just a close-up of the pin, or of the stud, excuse me, so you can see. So you can see the point of the stud here, and the circle. And these are what the pins would have looked like. So if you notice the iron pin and the copper alloy pin that I showed you, they would have been the stem of the pin, but it's still missing the head. And again, thank you, timeline. We also got out an iron buckle. You can see circle of the buckle here, and if you notice, it's hard to see, but there's a little piece that strides out from the rest of the buckle, so we'd be missing what goes across for the clasp. And that came out of Trench 3, probably early medieval. Coins. There we go. The two most interesting coins that we came out are the Stika, the copper alloy coins. They're the lowest denomination, and they're from the Anglo-Saxon time period. And also, just recently, we got our first ever Roman coin. Now, it's gonna load. Should load the picture. This is the one we're going to take the photo with. I'll just describe it then. This is one we're having issues with. On the site that it came out, you can use it to also date the area of the trench. If you notice, Graeme was saying that the southeast corner of the trench is 9th century. Well, the coin, when you look at it, you can actually see the writing on it, and it says Aenred Rex, which Rex being king, Aenred being the king of the time period he ruled from 810 to 841. So you can specifically date that area of the trench with the coin. And now this is just a close-up of the Roman coin we got out. We've still been unable to figure out exactly which emperor it was, but we're thinking that it was most likely late Roman period, probably 300s. So if you notice, you can see the back of the head of the emperor, and just the front of the face here, and then on the opposite side of the That's what's having trouble with the blown up images. Well, on the opposite side of the coin is a figure, most likely holding a cornucopia, and is either winged or has a bow behind them. And this indicates victory, which at the time period, the Romans weren't doing very well. So as a propaganda campaign, they were putting victory symbols on their coins. Well, the next was just the cornstone, which indicates from 1367. It's the same cornstone that Graeme had already shown you. And I was just going to reference it, as before, to the pottery. You can use that pottery to date the time period in which the cornstone came out from. Now we also run environmental. So these just are a few examples that have come out. Well, out of our environmental, we are getting examples of iron, copper alloy, work bone, and flint. I did mine on PowerPoint, so it's not going to really open very well in OpenOffice. And we're also getting examples of other pieces of pottery as well. The most promising piece that's come out frequently is green glazed pottery. Green glaze is 13th to 14th century pottery, and what they're doing to make the glaze is they're grinding up salt and they're packing it on the outside of the pot. So then when it's being fired, it brings about the glaze. The glaze itself, the reason why it's green is because they're adding copper inclusion to it, so that you're getting a green tinge in color. Sometimes you'll also get yellow-green that shows up, and the purpose for that, and the reasoning behind it, is that not only are they adding copper, but they're pouring little bits of iron in as well. So that's where you're getting the yellow-green from. And lastly, we're also getting beads. Now, there's three most prominent types of beads that we're getting out. We're getting out stone beads, we're getting out glass from this season, and we're getting a couple of ceramic beads as well. Yeah.
And bead blanks.
Yes, and a bead blank, which a bead blank is just a partially made bead that has been completed. Okay. Nothing there.
Hi, I'm Paul Gething, Director of the Bradford Kaims project, and I'm also one of the project directors of the Bamburgh Research project. I'm going to talk to you today about a prehistoric landscape. Is it up? Right. It's up two. This is where we are, basically, where we're sort of in this sort of area in here. So we're looking at this whole prehistoric landscape, base of the slope going down, this side of the railway line, and it's basically where a series of lakes and bog car land situated on top of it's on top of limestone, so it's calcareous, and it's pretty much the only calcareous fenland in the north of Britain. So you have to go down to Cambridgeshire to find comparable areas. And the area comes into a pinch point here and it bottlenecks, so there's lots and lots of activity concentrated in this area, especially prehistoric activity. This is what it looks like pretty much all the time, really. It's wet, it's got peat underneath everything, there's lots of marsh grasses, there's tussock grass, there's sedge. It would have been a more wooded landscape in the prehistoric, but it's largely, as you can see at the top there, the woodland, it's low-level woodland, occasional big trees, all coming into this flat area, which would be really wet underfoot. I'm going to run through a brief history of how we started the project down at the Kaims. I think it's about 4 or 5 years ago, I think it was now, there was a series of test pits dug through the landscape in order to identify exactly what was going on in the peatlands. So peat has incredibly good preservation qualities, so you can pretty much guarantee if anything's been there in the prehistoric or subsequently that the peat will retain at least some of the elements of it. So we thought, look along the slopes and look down in the peat and see what we can see. So we dug a load of test pits. Well, they dug a lot of test pits, I didn't dig any of them. And we started to find things. This is BK10, which, that's the year, T4, is part of one of our bigger trenches now, and we started to identify these black layers within it. And it soon became pretty obvious that these were prehistoric activity and they represent lots and lots of burning. So we didn't really have any dates at that stage, we just knew they were old. So, but if you start publishing it's old, people don't take it very seriously. So after a while, we decided that it probably was prehistoric. And when we start to find things like this, so we were finding much bigger areas of burning activity with bits of stone associated with it and lots of burnt fragments of stone as well. So we were starting to think that maybe these were burnt mounds. A burnt mound basically is what we've got in here, lots and lots of burnt mounds. A burnt mound is basically an area where people take stones and they put them in a fire and they use it to transfer the heat of the fire to another area, so they can use them to heat up water in a pot or water in any vessel, or they can use it to make steam, they can use it to make anything you can transfer heat to do. So there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of things you can do with a hot rock. So what we needed to do really was try and identify what was going on and when it had happened. This area in here is a stone platform. It's a sandstone platform, and it's big and it's flat. So it's obviously had lots of work done on it. And we had a series of archaeomagnetic dates done on it, which came back at 4,200 BC, so 6,000 years ago. So that kind of made us sit up a little when we're starting to get 6,000 years ago bits like that. It really should have been there. And that's a close-up of it from several seasons ago, and you can see the areas of burning in here, there's burning all around that edge, burning in here, and these are the stones that are some kind of preparation area, we think. We're not entirely sure what they're preparing, but we carried on. Then it rained for a year, and so, as you'll all remember up here, there was lots and lots of water everywhere, and the Kaims was flooded completely, apart from one little island. So we were really forced to go and excavate on this island and it turns out there's a burnt mound there. So we kind of got lucky as well. And this is another burnt mound, another big, wide one. This is, how far across was this? 8 metres, something like that?
18, isn't it?
18 was it? There you go. And this is a trough in the middle. So that flat stone there, and then there's a clay-lined trough. So basically the idea is that they were burning the stones, using this clay trough to house water, to hold water, and they were dropping stones in and using the subsequent hot water or steam for something. We don't know what. Very little bone, quite a few flints in this one, but not much real indicators of what they were doing. This was really only an evaluation, really, and something we wanted to do just for 1 year until we could get back into into Trench 6 and see what was going on there. But it gave us an insight into the whole of the landscape. We started to realise then that we had a much bigger landscape than a single excavation. And this is it from the other end. So you can see the scale of it, how big it is, and this is only one half. It goes off over that way as well, and out this way. So it is quite a monster, really, and probably about 30 to 40 centimetres thick. So a huge activity. When we first started looking at these, we really didn't have a huge amount of idea of what this represented, whether it was a single burning event, is it one family making 2 meals, we just didn't know. Since then we've done quite a lot of experiments with it, and we can cook for about 10 people with half a bucket of stones. So that would cover about this much really. So that gives you an indication of just how much activity there is here. This represents thousands and thousands of burning events for small groups of people. So that kind of surprised us a little. And then it stopped raining and we went back into Trench 6. We opened up a much, much bigger area and we started to find burnt mounds all over the place. We've got a handy trench cut through the middle of it where they put a drainage ditch in the 1970s, so we get a nice slice straight through the side, which allowed us to identify lots and lots of the burnt mounds in profile, lots and lots of activity going on down here, lots and lots of mini industrial area over here, and then just acres and acres of archaeology. And then we start to find wood. So bear in mind, this is sealed by the burnt mound, which is sealed by something that's dated to 4200 BC. So this wooden platform, it turned out to be a wooden platform, is at least 6,000 years old. Its preservation is fantastic. It's pretty much like the day it went down. But upslope, where there's no where we're above the wash table, it's disappeared completely. So only below the wash table does it survive, and it survives in fantastic detail. You can see some of it there. And contained within this was from 2013. We've got a wooden object, so you can see the shape of it here, and there's a little recurve of the paddle handle. It's like we've identified it as a paddle, not a paddle for a canoe or something like that, but the sort of thing you would use to move things around if you needed to move hot rocks, for example. So we think it may be something like that you can see coming out there. There are ethnographic parallels for these, not very many, but we occasionally see bits and bobs I think in the South Sea Islands are the ones I've noted. But it was an incredible find. There you can see it in a bit more detail. You can see probably the extent of the handle there, which would probably have been on that end, and then this bit here would have been probably used for holding stuff and moving stuff around. So what next? That's 2014. When we came in 2014, we got an office and a toilet. So it really moved up in the world. And chairs. You see, we had all the luxuries. And planks. And then we started to find things like this. We didn't really know what it was. The trench cut through here disturbed a huge amount of the archaeology. And there's a digger bucket scoop in here where we think the farmer, probably in the 1970s, was looking for this drain when they were putting this drain in. So there's a big digger scoop taken out of that, which again gives us a nice little insight into our excavation. That gives you the area. So we're looking at burnt mounds in here, burnt mounds in here, burnt mounds in here, and burnt mounds in here, and there's one in section. So at least 5 burnt mounds in this area. This may span many hundreds of years. I mean, some of the burnt mounds that have been identified last for 500 years, so we don't really know whether it's a burnt mound that's used sequentially for 500 years or it's just one huge burning event. I think probably the former. This is a section through the burnt mound, and you can see the depth of it there, and you can see the banding of the stones in there. There's lots and lots of charcoal, and there's more stones down there. This is Sam cleaning up the section so that we can take a sample of it, and basically we hammer in metal tins and cut behind them, and it gives us a profile of the stratigraphy within the burnt mound and at a microscopic level. So we can take that back to the labs and look at the microstratigraphy within the burnt mound and identify exactly what's going on in minute detail. We're also looking for some of the micro and macro fossils contained within it, so anything that's burnt, anything that's scientific, basically. So all sorts of things can potentially come out of that. But then we started to look in detail in this far corner, and this in here is a trough. And that's the holy grail of burnt mounds. We were looking for something that really, the burnt mound, it needs a reason to exist. You don't just burn stones for no reason. And one of the reasons is you have something like a vessel like this, you fill it with water or let it fill with water, and then you drop hot stones into it, and then you get hot water, effectively. So it's like it's a prehistoric system, effectively. I'll say in a bit more detail, and you can see here it's basically it's a tree trunk, and around there, and it's been hollowed in the centre. So this is fill that's basically clay, silt, and bits of twigs and hot stones that they're not hot anymore, but they were hot at one point. So filled with that. We half sectioned it and we fully sampled the whole of the interior, this half of the interior, and then we put microstruct tins down it. So we've got a whole stratigraphic sequence through the trough. And we've also now taken a slice through here, so we'll be able to identify what species of tree, what type of tree it is, and that will hopefully give us information. We think at this stage it's probably oak, but we'll know more in the future, obviously. We've opened up more of the platform, and now it seems to be a much, much bigger platform than we ever thought possible. And every now and again you get this action going on where the branches of trees or little bits of bundles of twigs where it's been laid down one top of the other, and then every now and again you get something like this. It's got holes drilled through it, it's been snapped there, and there's a handle at this end. No idea what it is, but it's created by humans. So from around 6,000 years ago, we don't know of any parallels, we have no idea what it is. So if anybody can think what it will be, please tell me, because that will be great. The best things we've got so far, it might be part of a sled, one of the runners of a sled, and this would be used to lash it up. Or another thing that someone said to us tentatively was that it looks like a reindeer whip, which apparently is what is used in Norway for herding reindeer. So maybe, I don't know. Also, we've done a systematic series of cores throughout the peaks. So we're basically just dropping cores with this. Basically, it's just a hollow tube on a handle that we ram into the peat. We add extension cores to it. We just effectively just take out little plugs of peat or whatever it is we want to do. This has got clay and then platform and then topsoil in it. And we can identify the depth of the wooden platform, how deep it is, how extensive it is. And at parts, it's up to 2 meters thick. So we've got a wooden platform on the edge of our burnt mounds, which extends probably 15 meters out into the clay and is 2 meters thick. So when you're looking at a pre-industrial society, that's a fairly big undertaking. Well, it's a massive undertaking, actually. This year, as well as Trench 6, we've been excavating another trench that's over the hedge line. It's a fairly modern hedge line. And this, again, is a burnt mound, believe it or not. So we've got a burnt mound up in this corner, and we were looking really to see how the burnt mound interfaces with the peatlands. So we started to excavate that, and we were expecting it really to be Bronze Age. The burnt mound that we did in 2012 was Bronze. Part part of the strategy for excavating this site was to take as many samples as we could. And the grid pattern you can see on here are samples that have been taken across the whole site. We basically take them out, put them into buckets and take them away, and they'll be looked at in the lab. So we'll get a whole cross-section of this in the laboratory. Then we've got our slicer here to look at what's going on down onto Mesolithic landscape. So we're getting flints out of here which are probably around 8,000 years old. And that comes down here into this area, which is peat. So we've got peat sealing our Mesolithic landscape, which gives us the opportunity potentially to look at sealed Mesolithic activity, which will give us preserved artifactual remains, hopefully, if we're really, really lucky. And that's a close-up of part of the trench, and you can see there are just post holes and stake holes all over the place. It's just absolutely riddled with activity. And part of what they're doing, I think, basically is using wooden stakes and posts just to hold up anything and everything. So we think they might be using fish traps, holding up little microstructures, making drying racks, anything you can think of. Basically, they stick a stake into the peat and it leaves a tiny little hole or a slightly bigger hole. And we're seeing that. For us now, what we need to do is start making lines out of these and hoops out of them, rings out of them, trying to work out if there's any kind of pattern to them, what's going on. But it's incredibly difficult because there are literally hundreds. Experimental. One of the other things we've been doing is doing some experimental archaeology. So we've basically taken preconceptions about the prehistoric and tested them in semi-scientific fashion. We basically did it this year more for fun really than anything. But as a preface to next year rolling out a whole suite of experimental archaeology which will be done scientifically. We wanted to see basically how much fun it was and whether or not we could do it. So you see someone here? Who? Harry. Crushing up grain. And that's malted barley, and he's crushing that up with a stone in a pan. And then what we did was we heated up a load of rocks in a fire and put them into this trough. So this is our interpretation of a prehistoric trough. It's actually, I think, probably a Victorian cattle from a cattle shed, but it serves us. We heated up that 40 litres of water with 5 stones. So that gave us enough to make some beer. So we put all the malted barley in there with honey and elderflower and cooked it for a couple of hours, drained it off and then left it under a hedge for a week. And that gave us fantastic beer, which we're still drinking. You can see it being sieved out there. Since that happened, we've not invented, we've learned how to use willow and sedge strainers. So we've been taught by Paula how to make willow baskets, or little tiny baskets, and we've been draining out the mash from this and leaving it in the trough. And it works just as well. It works actually better, I think, than the sieves. So we're learning as we go. We've also been splitting logs, so using just wedges basically that we've just carved. So we decided we're going to split some logs. We've spent a day just hitting a log with sticks basically, and that works. So, and now basically next year I think we'll put all that in some kind of format and actually start to test it scientifically. We'll carry on excavating trench 6, go back into trench 9, got another trench that will open up. So it's never ending. We've just got a huge amount to do, huge amount. But it's all fun.
That doesn't say right. Yay.
It worked.
Ours at 2 o'clock.
Okay, so this is the site that I was showing you guys that came out of the southeast corner. If you notice, starting here, you can see an A, you can see the start of an E, the top, and it goes down, the N, you've got an R right here, an E, the D, R, E, X. So you've got N red X, and there's a cross here as well. So this is how you are able to date that corner of the trench in correlation. So now I don't want to count my blessings too much.
Pushing the technology to the limit.
Okay, so we have this one. So this is the face of the Roman coin.
Come on.
Now, you can see some writing over here, which would have given us more indication, but unfortunately it's too worn down for us to get anything. In Roman coins generally, you have the field plane underneath, would have been the date, but of course it's too worn down. You have the figure here, where this is the head, goes down into the arms, and then they're dressed. It's probably female. And if you notice, you can see the cornucopia right here that they're blowing out of. And behind here is either wings for winged victory, or it could potentially be a bow. And oh, we have some pottery now, at least. So this is the green glazed pottery that I was telling you about. These pieces would have been the ones that, after being packed with salt, they would have had copper inclusions in them as well. So then they were being fired to get the green color. And then this piece in the center right here is Bamburgh ware. Bamburgh ware is only known to have ever been discovered in Bamburgh. If you notice, yeah, that's the name. Now, if you notice, there's little pockmark inclusions, and that's because those are quartz inclusions. So they're actually using quartz as temper when they're making the pottery.
What's the sort of date on that one?
And that is rough medieval period.
Jenny Bourne, our experts, seems to be confident with 12th century, but thinks it might go back a bit early, so maybe 11th, 12th. She wouldn't rule out the possibility of early, but that seems unlikely.
Apparently not. But, I just... Okay, well, we tried.